Good evening. I'm Steve Edwards with the Institute of Politics, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to tonight's conversation between David Axelrod and Karl Rove as they explore the new American politics. And I know we'll talk not just about the new American politics, but also what's happening around the world in light of yesterday's outcome and the French elections as well. So a timely conversation with the two of them. And then I wanted to remind you that tomorrow night we'll be back in this room for another timely conversation featuring Grover Norquist and Austin Goolsbee taking a look at the Trump tax plan and the structure of taxes in our country and the prospect for tax reform more broadly speaking. So that'll be back here tomorrow night at 5:15. You can find out more about those events and everything else upcoming in our series on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. Tonight, we'll open up the floor to you for your questions for Karl Rove and for David Axelrod. We'll put a microphone in the middle and invite you to line up to pose your questions. As always, we ask that you make your question a question and that you keep it short and to the point so that we can get to as many of you as possible. This is also a great time for you to turn off your cell phones or to silence them as we're recording tonight's event. It's also a good time for me to step away and formally turn the microphone over to Michael Ferguson, who's a second year in the college majoring in public policy and in Spanish, to formally introduce our speakers tonight. Michael?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's an honor to introduce tonight's guest, Mr. Karl Rove, who is known as one of the most successful strategists and policy advisors in American politics. Mr. Rove's career as a strategist has spanned several decades, beginning at a very early age when he made a name for himself in high school as one of the best debaters in the state of Utah. Later in college, Mr. Rove took an active role in conservative politics, eventually going on to become the National Executive Director and then Chairman of the College Republicans organization. Mr. Rove went on to manage a variety of successful senatorial and gubernatorial campaigns for the Republican Party until 2000, when he became the chief strategist for George W. Bush's presidential bids. After his re-election in 2004, Bush publicly referred to Rove as the architect behind his electoral victories. Rove served the Bush administration until his resignation in 2007 in a variety of capacities, including senior policy advisor, deputy chief of staff, and head of the offices of political affairs, public liaison, and strategic initiatives. And since leaving the White House, Rove has acted as a contributor for the Wall Street Journal and a policy analyst for Fox News. Tonight, Mr. Rove joins David Axelrod, the director of the Institute of Politics and former senior advisor to President Barack Obama, to discuss the ways in which political strategy has evolved in recent years, as well as what the 2016 elections can tell us about the ways in which political campaigns, parties, and elections are changing. Tonight, we ask, what has driven this shift in our political climate, and what can we expect looking forward? Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Karl Rove and Mr. David Axelrod.
Thanks, Michael. First of all, let me make a few housekeeping points. One is, and I told this to Karl, I woke up this morning in Boston. I went to this event at the JFK Library last night.
Who did that event involve?
And I made the...
Was there anybody significant
there was
speaking
an honorary
there?
former politician.
Oh.
And, but I
Did you write the speech?
I got back to my... I did not, but I listened to it. I found it very arresting.
Did you applaud at all the right points?
I did.
Did you stand at the end?
I did, yes.
Excellent, good. 3 good marks, A+.
But I got back to my hotel room and made the mistake of turning on the Cubs game. And I thought, well, I'll just, I watched them tie the game in the 9th. I said, I'll watch, for an inning, 2 innings, 3 innings, 4 innings. And all of a sudden I realized, holy smokes, I got to get up in a couple of hours. So anything that happens tonight is not my fault. It's the fault of the Cubs. Secondly, I want to tell you that Karl and I have done a lot of these events together, and we disagree on a lot of things, but I appreciate him as someone who has spent his life as a practitioner in the political arena, and admire him as a very bright guy who's committed to the institutions of our country. So
actually, that's just BS. He really likes my wife a lot. In fact, I'm a little nervous about the relationship between Karen and David. We were in Kiev, Ukraine, and he wanted to take her to we stayed at a very nice hotel, and he wanted to take her to the men's club in the place, if you get my drift. And I didn't like that at all, David. Not at all.
I know she's not here. But anyway, what I wanted to say is, I really didn't invite him here. I'm not going to get into a debate with the Utah State High School debate champion.
Yeah, well, it's a small state. It's a small state. Not a lot of debaters.
But I do want to talk about where we are and the political moment in which we're in. And just to confuse everybody, mon ami, I want to start with France.
Mon Dieu.
Macron won yesterday. I think you and I probably agree that that was a good thing. But there were a lot of people in France who didn't agree, not just the people who voted for Le Pen, but a lot of people who registered sort of blank ballots. So half the country didn't want this guy to be president. And there are these, on the left and right, these big populist, anti-trade, anti-immigrant forces. What's going on because we've seen some of this here as well. Yeah. You're a historian as well. What is this moment?
Well, first of all, I was there in January, which was early in the third week of January, the week of January 20th. I don't know why I got out of the United States during that week, but I did. And I was over to explain the American election to the French. And at that point, François Fillon was the front runner. And everybody said, oh, Fillon, he will be the president. He will be our president. We are busily building the cabinet. And
he ran into problems.
And I think it's indicative of what happened to him. This is routine. French politicians put their family members on their payroll and pull down a nice check in euros, and they don't necessarily have to show up.
There's certain places in America where that happens.
Well, I've heard it might have been happening here in Chicago, but I'm not really certain of that. But he got knocked down as a result. And I think it's an expression of this anti-establishment, this sort of populist moment that we're seeing in the world, particularly in the advanced democracies, because people are concerned about how responsive the institutions of their government are. And it's particularly fervent in Europe today, where there's a generalized sense in many parts, and we saw it in Britain. One of the big reasons why Brexit popped along was, particularly among older voters, there was a sense that they had lost authority to these anonymous bureaucrats in Brussels who were dictating. And it's not just France. I mean, if it were not for Merkel, we'd see this in Germany. And last night I was having dinner with some friends. We got to talking about this is popping up. A friend had just come back from Sweden, Mark McKinnon.
Yes.
Our friend Mark, who had done the TV for Bush, and is just the circus. I'm supposed to encourage you to watch the circus.
It's a good show.
Yeah, it's a good show. It's a very good show. A very good show. He said, if you said good show, I say very good show. If you said very good show, I should say very, very good show.
Well, so we're on tape, so he'll know we did it.
Yeah, we got evidence. But he came back saying, wait a minute, here in Sweden, the quintessential Scandinavian democracy, he ran into continuing concerns about immigration. And I said, well, that's funny, because I was in Norway a couple years ago. I am a Norwegian American.
Are there other Norwegian Americans?
Are there others? Yeah, well, there are not too many of us. I am, however, in the Scandinavian American Hall of Fame in Minot, North Dakota. So anyway, I ran into the same concerns.
Visit if you get the chance.
Yeah, visit if you can. They've got a nice little picture of me there. And 2007, Norwegian American Host Fest.
Nice.
But same thing. And we're seeing this all over Europe, and we're seeing the populist moment here in America. And populism is not so much an ideology as it is an attitude, a generalized sense that somehow or another the system is unfair and screwing the little guy. And so you can have populism of the left, as in Bernie Sanders. You can have populism somewhat of the right, as in the case of Trump. But you can also have Marie Le Pen, who is simultaneously right on the cultural questions, anti-immigrant, but also on the left. One of the amazing things to me is Trump is endorsing somebody whose economic program, or subtly encouraging somebody whose economic program is about 6 steps to the left of Bernie Sanders, which is why if you look at that map of France, traditionally the northern part of France, and particularly the northeastern part of France, is traditionally a socialist stronghold, and she is cleaning up big time to Macron.
Right.
So to me, this is the beginning, not the end of it, though. She got almost twice the percentage that her father had gotten. She came in under the 40% mark, which I thought was important. But
as we told, a lot of people simply turned in blank
Blank
ballots.
ballots.
Other
And-
people involved. The left so rejected Macron.
And France has a strong presidency. You think we got a strong unitary presidency. They got a stronger one. And the important thing, though, is you have to have a parliamentary majority. He has no political party. He was a socialist, but he's got,
And parliamentary elections in a month. Someone
month,
put it
yeah.
in someone in France put it this way to me. He got elected yesterday, and he's got his midterm elections in a month. And if it doesn't work out for him, he will not have a governing coalition.
Well, that may be true, but typically midterm elections tend bad towards the incumbent. The reason that they have the parliamentary elections so quickly after the presidential elections is so that the president gets the wind behind his sails and takes his party into a parliamentary majority.
But he doesn't have a party.
He has no party. I mean, they literally have, I think there are 577 seats in the parliament, and I think they had last week like 5 candidates that they've chosen. And they're going to be the center-right Republicans, they're going to be the center-left Democrats, they're going to be the socialists. Le Pen has 2 members, but count on this new parliament not having a majority. And the question is a 39-year-old with no experience in elective politics going to be able to knit together a majority in the parliament to make reforms that simultaneously expand economic growth and acknowledge some of the concerns of Le Pen voters without adopting the Le Pen agenda?
Yeah, well, here's the thing that concerns me, and I think it's common to all of our countries, and that is the impact that technology is having. Technology has enormous positive capacities, but it also is churning at such a fast rate that it has an impact on the jobs and we hear a lot of talk about China and Mexico and jobs, but it's robots and computers that are wreaking the biggest havoc right now. The question is, and then we have technology as it affects communication. So communications, you're bombarded at all times. And the question is whether democratic institutions, which are built to be deliberative, which are built to be a little balky, can respond fast enough and effectively enough. And it seems to me he's really under the gun there to show that he can produce some progress, or people will sour pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, and look, I think there are more obstacles than just technology. I mean, we're talking about a country that has a 35-hour work week and it's virtually impossible to fire somebody. So should we be surprised if it is difficult to create a business, operate a business, expand a business?
He ran on some of those issues
that you got 23% youth unemployment.
Yeah. On the other hand, it may be that the 35-hour work week or a shorter work week is one way you create more job opportunities.
Well, that's what the socialist government, the 2 socialist governments with a conservative government briefly in between. The 2 socialist governments went from a 40 to a 35-hour work week, and we're calling for a 30-hour work week in the run-up to this campaign. And of course, what's the result of that been? Stagnating employment. 10% has now become the new normal in France, and unemployment among young people is nearly a quarter, and among immigrant communities even higher. So my sense is to see that the idea of you're going to be able to pay somebody a 40-hour work week paycheck for a 35-hour week work just doesn't work out.
You are very much a pro-trade Republican. Mm-hmm. You've emphasized deficit and fiscal probity and deficit reduction and so on. Is that the Republican Party of Donald Trump today? I mean, is that the prevailing view of, because he ran on a platform that was very much anti-trade, paid very little heed to this issue of government deficits and so on.
Well, yeah, I mean, on trade, I think there are 3 camps inside the administration, I think. One are the fair traders, like Wilbur Ross. We have international rules governing trade, and we seem to be the only people who are living up to them. What about these other people? Shouldn't they be living up to them too? We have low tariffs or non-existent tariffs. Why do we have relatively high tariffs in some of these countries with whom we trade? We lowered the obstacles to the importation of their goods, but when are they going to reciprocate? So you got the fair traders. You got the free traders, and like Gary Cohen and some of the others who say, we ought to, free trade has made us a more prosperous country. Adam Smith was right, and it's also helped alleviate poverty around the world, and it would be a grave disservice to our own interests to reverse it. And we can deal with either one of those groups. What scares me is we've had some mercantilists in the administration. Peter Navarro, maybe Lighthouser, Bannon. The attitude is a bad trade deal is a trade deal that that you buy more from, you buy less from us than we buy from you. And okay, so I know we're being taped, but I spent 3 hours with Trump at the end of May, and three of us, and one of the issues that came up was trade. And he said, NAFTA is a terrible deal. I said, really? Why? Well, it's a terrible deal. The Mexicans, they're just selling us lots of stuff, and we have a huge trade deficit with them. Well, I said, well, great. We under NAFTA, we have a trade surplus with Canada. We have a $25 billion deficit in the sale of goods, American goods to Canada versus what we buy from them, but we have a $37 billion surplus in services. So we have a trading advantage of $12 billion with Canada, surplus, and which he was unaware of. And what I couldn't get was the answer to what exactly is wrong with the deal. If you walked in and said, look, I think they've got non-tariff barriers to the sale of American goods and services, and we need to get them to do X, Y, and Z, I could say that's a legitimate and reasonable place to begin a discussion on trade. But if your thing is, you got to buy more from me than I buy from you, or you got to buy a lot more than you're currently buying, those aren't necessarily the basis for saying to somebody, let's redo the deal.
How much of it is, since you spent time with him, how much of it do you think is deeply held belief, and how much of it is a sense that these were really, really powerful applause lines?
I don't know. I do know that in the course of the discussion, our host started talking about Chinese rolled steel and how the Chinese are, and they are, dumping.
Yeah.
Costs them $650 a ton to produce it. They dump it in the United States for $400 a ton. And they periodically do this in order to keep their industry alive. They're being driven by one thing, which is how do we create 25 million jobs a year in order to satisfy the demands of rural poor who want to pour into these new cities in China and have a better living than they had before. And so if they, as a society, they have to sustain that through spending a lot of money on construction projects that don't pan out, and steel mills that overproduce steel, or aluminum mills and so forth, they'll do it. So Trump said, yeah, there's not a thing we can do about it. Well, I wasn't exactly high up on his list, so I had nothing to lose. So I said, actually, there is. Under Section 174 of the U.S. trade laws, the President of the United States can make a referral to the U.S. International Trade Commission, which he appoints, and if the commission finds that there's evidence of improper, illegal trading practices, the President is authorized under Section 302 of our trading laws to apply temporary tariffs.
I'm sure he's glad he invited you over.
Yeah.
So,
as President George W. Bush did on Chinese rolled steel in October of 2002. He said, really? And then he said later on, we got to China, we got to get them out of the WTO. That's a big mistake. I said, no, right thing to do. Because joining the WTO binds the Chinese to an international set of trading norms, and if we think they're violating that agreement under the WTO, we can file an action, as President Obama in 2015 had 113 trading actions filed at the WTO, and if history's, I haven't followed up to see how many you won, but you would win virtually every one of them. That's just the history of it. If the United States goes to the WTO and we got our facts together, we win. He said, I had no idea. A couple weeks later, went and made a speech in Pennsylvania, and he says, and I'm not kidding, he said, I really like saying this, under Section 174 of the U.S. trade laws, Section 302. Anyway, so, I think it was more, he had been talking about this for years, and it's built up out of maybe he doesn't have the knowledge of how the system works.
but he knows how the sound of it
Well,
sounds.
I think that's I'm not going to get into figuring out if that's I do think there's an authentic, look, he comes from a place where he has seen people who've suffered by trade. and he has become their voice, particularly in this campaign. There were two things that when he got to talking, you know how we're used to seeing candidates and dealing with them, and we can sort of tell when it's something that really is ingrained. There were two things that he talked about where you could tell it really mattered to him, and one was the blue-collar working man or working woman who was getting the short end of the stick. Because he is a populist, and he has a sense the system is rigged against certain people. One of them was him. He's the outsider from Queens, and all those smart people from Wall Street, they screwed him over, which is why he was happy to go declare bankruptcy on those banks anytime he wanted to.
And also to screw a whole bunch of contractors.
Yeah, well, that's a side
little
thing.
guys.
That's just a little thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing was when he would get to talking about victims of violence by illegal immigrants.
Right.
And those two things you could tell just were mattered to him. The blue-collar worker who was on the short end of the stick and didn't have somebody who was speaking out for him. Now, we can talk all day long about whether or not he can actually get that done, but I think we make a mistake. I think they make a mistake in France, they make a mistake in Europe, we make a mistake in the United States if we don't sort of figure out a way to, in the right way, take the air out of the populist balloon.
Well, listen, we're here in the sort of industrial heartland, and there are communities. Jennifer Granholm isn't here, is she? If I just posted a podcast with her today. She's a fellow here, and she spoke very movingly about what's happened to a lot of these towns in Michigan. I mean, she was there in the height of the recession as well. But I have a place in rural Michigan. Everybody had Trump signs in their yards. Good people, good neighbors, hardworking people. But they feel like they do feel like they've been screwed.
Yeah, well, but we make a mistake if we ignore it. We make a mistake also if we just consider it to be sort of a populist expression about trade policies. It's deeper than that. John Judas, who was the first guy on the Democratic side to talk about the coalition of the ascendant,
yes,
which is what your 2008 victory is based around, also a couple years ago wrote an article about the emerging Republican advantage, where he said basically for a variety of reasons, these working class, blue collar, small town and rural in particular, voters who were nominal Democrats or independents were getting completely unglued with the Democratic Party. And they're out there floating around. And he grabbed them in some places, 3 places in particular, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But they're up for grabs, and both political parties are being disrupted, and neither political party has figured out how to deal with the future.
Yeah. Well, the coalition of the ascendant turned out to be the coalition of the inadequate in 2016. I think there was too much. There was too much reliance on that. When you said, "I'm glad you went where you went," I thought you were going somewhere else when you talked about where he grabbed them. That's a touchy. But anyway, so
Texas is sort of a church-going state. We don't think like that. Now you may, Axelrod, particularly after what you tried to do in dragging my wife into that men's club in Kiev. I don't trust you, man.
But it's interesting when you talked about the 3 different camps in the White House, but you didn't. But Trump wasn't mentioned in any of those camps. And it raises the question of how the White House is functioning. I quite agree with you. You wrote and said that you thought this 100-day thing is really an artifice, and I agree with that. And most people say, "I can't believe Trump supporters are sticking with him." It's like, it's 100 days.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think but you do get a sense of sort of how a place is operating or not operating. And you wrote some very, very
Go ahead and read it out. It sounds so good.
smart columns before the president took office.
I thought the smarter ones have been since.
And those are good too.
Yeah, thank you.
I can't read them all, okay? We've got questions from the audience coming. But you said, don't get sidetracked by hot button issues, especially those unconnected to the economy, jobs, and wages. Lower expectations for immediate change. Passing legislation is difficult even when the president's party holds large majorities, which the GOP lacks in the Senate. act in ways that signal competence rather than chaos, and remember, success begets credit, which makes further successes more likely. By that measure,
What date was that, incidentally?
I don't have the date here, but it was right before he
Yeah,
took
yeah.
office. How's he doing?
Well, I'd refer you to my column of last week where I discussed how he's doing.
Yeah.
And
All right, now I'm embarrassed.
yeah, well, you should
I remember
be, man.
these.
You promised me you'd read every single column every Thursday morning.
But what?
No, look, I put it in my column. I mean, I think the 100-day mark is a complete artifice and ridiculous, and particularly unfair in an age where we have such partisanship that so many things, even if you've got crushing majorities, as you all came in
Yeah,
with.
we did. Yeah.
Yeah, you got the, what'd you get? You got the infrastructure bill by 100 days. We didn't have majorities, but we got the tax cut by May 24th. But, you know, it's 100 days is ridiculous. But I do think, and I put it in my column, I think he is engaged in needless controversy. You know, it's sort of hard to define what presidential means, but it's like good art. We know it when we see it. And saying Meryl Streep is not a good actress, and picking a fight with the New York Times by, you know, saying they do lousy real estate deals. You know, this is punching down, and we don't want to see any president punch down. I thought election night, which he clearly did not expect to win. I have it on good authority that when he got the exit polls like the rest of us got it, he took it to heart. I said 4 times before they've been wrong, so I'm not going to invest a lot in this right now. But he took a lot of it in and said, you know, basically we gave it a shot. You saw it in his headquarters. There was no crowd there waiting to, you know, cheer him on. They were all standing outside of Fox News 3 blocks south of the Hilton. And
Waiting to cheer you on, right?
well, I'm modest. I can't say it was me. I think it was Britt Hume. But I thought his statement that night was gracious and warm and exactly what the country wanted, a little bit of humility and a sense of, you know, we have a big thing ahead of us. I thought the inaugural was exactly the wrong tone. This is the moment where people want to hear a president unite the country. And they even in the darkest of times, even in the 3 years into the Great Depression, what did FDR say? Things are in a hell in a handbasket and we're going downhill. No, he said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And this is the moment where we all sort of engage in a hopeful activity of saying we can be better. And you know, he's done some good things. I'm not going to get applause at the University of Chicago, but Neil Gorsuch will be an excellent member of the Supreme Court. And
you go to the little
thank
applause.
Thank you. From some of the
Those are the-
undergraduates here at
those
the
are-
university.
Or the Norwegian American.
Yeah, well, no, I've spotted the two of them. I'm watching them very carefully. The cabinet, I think, is particularly on the national security side. In fact, the selection of the cabinet gives me a little bit of hope in a certain way, because think about this. First guy that he picks that gets approved is John Kelly, Homeland Security. And so Kelly walks in and Trump says, well, I'm going to build a big, beautiful wall all along the southern border. And Kelly says, well, not a good idea. Don't need it. Where are you going to put it on the 1,264-mile border of Texas that's a river? Are you going to put it in the middle of the river? Exactly where are you going to put it? So some of the border, yes, but all of the border, no. And Trump says, great, you're my chair, my Secretary of Homeland Security.
Though he's still talking about the wall.
He is, but and look, there are places along the wall where the wall needs to be built. But in the Santa Elena Canyon, in which the U.S. border is 3,200 feet up in the air and the Mexican border is 1,500 feet up in the air, we really don't, for that 150 miles, need to have a wall. And, we do need a wall in 15 miles, around Del Rio, Texas. So there are places. It's done. It's worked in San Diego. It's made both communities safer. And but anyway, bottom line is, he picks a guy who says, I disagree with you. Does the same with Mattis. He says to Mattis, we're going to torture the crap out of these people. And he says, no, violates our international commitments, puts our troops at risk, and maybe enhanced interrogation, but torture, we won't get good information. He says, great, you're my Secretary of Defense. Tillerson walks in and he says, don't you think
I honestly think part of why he was the Secretary of Defense is because he looked the part, and his nickname was Mad Dog.
Yeah, but you know what? There's a little substance behind that. There's a reason why he got that nickname. Because he's a tough guy.
Yeah.
And so in walks Tillerson, and he says, you know, don't you think we can have a wonderful relationship with Putin? Can't we have a better relationship? And Tillerson says, you haven't had to deal with the SOB for the last 15 years. Doesn't have our interest at heart, and says, great, you're my Secretary of State. So there's a willingness to tolerate people around him who don't necessarily share his, sort of, yes, I'll agree with everything you tell me to do, and I'll go execute it. There are people who are willing to say to him, here's what I think, and that's important for a president.
I think a lot of people, even Democrats, took some comfort in Mattis and Kelly.
H.R. McMaster.
Yeah. Well, on the McMaster thing, there's a piece today that I wanted to ask you about, because it's this sort of lurching thing that is concerning. And this story says that Trump has, this is from this guy Eli Lake at Bloomberg, who's, you know
Yeah,
him.
I read the piece.
Oh, yeah.
I'll summarize it shortly if you like.
You don't have to, because I can read it.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. Okay, so here's the piece. Lots of people inside the White House are telling Eli Lake that while McMaster is doing a better job of running the National Security Council process, he's irritated the president by disagreeing with the president in meetings. And I take this as real. It's go on Eli Lake, Bloomberg, great story to read. There's a broader point here, though. Trump has put out a statement saying I have confidence in him, which is okay till he doesn't have confidence in him, which is true for every president and everybody who serves in the White House. But for me, the line of this thing is, this is a continuation of something I talked about in my column. I had
Staff going after
the
each
staff
other.
going after each other.
Yeah.
I had dinner recently with a couple of members of the Trump White House staff, and they said, we don't understand why there are all these articles saying that Steve Bannon and Brian Priebus don't like each other, because they get along so well. And I said, well, maybe because the Washington Post ran a story in which there were 11 negative quotes from at least 9 different members of the White House staff attacking other members of the White House staff. Maybe that's the problem. I mean, I worked in a place where that was unheard of, well, virtually, never completely unheard of. But the idea that in this White House that people are so disloyal to first their president and their colleagues that they're willing to call up and sort of conduct warfare in the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times, and anybody else who will talk to them. Remember, the Washington Post and the New York Times are not the mouthpieces of the Trump White House, but they're happy to diss somebody else in the White House. I think this is completely unconstructive.
Yeah,
not good for the country and not good for the president.
What you hear from reporters is that they've never experienced an administration where people were more willing to leak on each other.
I had a friend. I said, "Where are you getting all this? This is really good reporting. How are you getting all this stuff?" They said, "I answer my phone."
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is this is Trump's, this sort of disruptive management style. This setting up competing power bases is apparently part of his management style.
Well, I probably invested with more than I should, because I worked in a place where this didn't happen much. In fact, I think you and I have talked about this. I almost didn't go to the White House for fear of this. After the Supreme Court decision, I was in Washington when it came down.
The decision that made on Bush v. Gore.
Yeah, or as we refer to it, Gore v. Bush. But when I got back to Texas, I was over at the governor's mansion 2 days later, and day and a half later, and Governor Bush said, "It's great, we're going to Washington together. You're going to be working in the White House." And I said, "Well, I'm not certain I am." And he's like, because we've known each other a long time, and I'd sort of burned my business. He told me to get rid of my business when he got ready to run for president. So I'd sort of burned all my bridges. And he said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Look, I'm okay at electoral politics, but internecine and warfare, I'm not good at all. I don't like it. I'm not good at it." And I was horrified by the stories I heard. I talked to people, as I suspect you did, when you got ready to go in.
I had the same conversation, but you finish yours and I'll share mine.
Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, 41, Clinton, they all said the same thing. If you ever get a chance to work in the White House, do it. It'll be the best job you'll ever have, and it'll be the worst. I remember Andy Card telling me the first time he went into a meeting in the Reagan White House, There are only two meeting rooms in the West Wing, the Roosevelt room, which is not much longer than from here to there and less wide from here to the front row. And that's where most of the meetings are. And he walked into the room, one big long table, and there was a woman holding a seating chart, and she said, "Are you a Baker person or a Meese person?" Because they put them on opposite sides of the table. And
Like a wedding.
Yeah. Well, of two families that don't like each other.
Yes.
Yeah. But people would say, look, just be prepared. There'll be you'll be in a meeting, you'll make an observation, and the next day you'll read about it in the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you'll be made to look like an idiot. And I said, I'm just not made for that. And he said, don't worry, I saw what it did to Reagan, and I saw what it did to my dad, referring to 41. And he said, trust me, it's not going to happen. And he worked diligently at making that happen.
Yeah.
And it requires somebody from the top down. You're right, you mentioned the disruptor. He is a disruptor. He's used to operating with a small staff that, he shouts orders at, and they go build the ice rink or take over the hotel or do a branding deal in Dubai. But that's not running the government. And Bush worked at it assiduously. I know good old boy from Midland, but Yale history major and Harvard MBA, and he understood management, and he understood the necessity of creating an environment which people understood can't do an end run, got to be willing to say what you believe, you'll be treated with respect if you do, but you got to say it in front of people who don't agree with you. And then you got to respect his ability to make the decision to move on.
He also, he had been around government
Yeah.
and White Houses for quite a long time.
And been governor
and he
of the
had
second
people
biggest state,
around
yeah.
him. Like you and I were, you were in the Reagan. Did you get in the White? Were you in the White House in the Reagan?
Please. I'm not as old as you are. So back in the Reagan era, I was a teenager.
Looking at you, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
But
He's such a shit ass.
but when I went to the White House, I hadn't worked in a White House, but Rahm Emanuel was there, Pete Rouse, who had been on the Hill for 30 years. There were all kinds of people around who had experience, and it made a difference. This president doesn't have anyone in the White House at a senior level who had really government experience.
Yeah, and look, that I'm not certain that's responsible for everybody leaking on each other and cutting each other up.
No, that's not.
But I do think it means lack of process. And you need process, as you know, in the White House. You need to have a deliberative process that causes people to come forward with their views on an issue, crystallize the areas of agreement, hone the areas of disagreement, find ways, if possible, to make certain that all the available information the president needs to have to make a decision is collected and organized, carry it forward to a principals meeting so that you make certain that everybody who has a sense of that equity, has an equity in that, has a sense that they've been touched, and then carry it forward to the president in writing and in person so the president can both read everybody's arguments and also then can hear from them in person before he makes a decision. And I'm not certain that the absence of, take a look, think about it. The first travel ban. On Wednesday and Thursday, they reach out to Kelly, and by sometime on Thursday, Kelly's people, and remember, he's the only cabinet member, and he's only got a couple of
barely
people.
gotten his foot in the door.
And he's got a couple of people around him. They report back to the White House, worried about applying to green card holders. Sounds like it is. You better clarify that. Second, it sounds like it applies to people who currently have a visa. You're going to have a problem with the courts on that. Worried about the special visas for Iraqis who helped the war effort. And finally, concerned about having Iraq on it at all.
Right.
So they say that on Thursday. Friday, without telling the Secretary of Homeland Security that they're going to do it, without even telling the Secretary of Defense at whose office, the Pentagon, they're going to do it, that afternoon they release the EO on the travel ban, and they have no copy of it for 2 hours and don't have anybody to brief it until after 8 o'clock that night. So that says to me no process.
Bad, huh?
Yeah, no process.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. And even on the legislative fights, that disarray has shown up. We're going to start. Oh, you're already queuing up.
Yeah.
Because I was hoping you'd take a little time so I could get a couple of other things in here. I don't want to debate the healthcare law with you because I think we have different views of this, but I want to ask you a political question. Just practitioner to practitioner. You were one of the smartest, and you still, through Crossroads, do stuff, message guys, ads and mail. The notion of a law that is a pretty deep tax cut, you know, for people at the very upper $50,000 for a millionaire, that does what this law does, in terms of scaling back on pre-existing conditions. Some of the Medicaid cuts, I know you've spoken to this. He's going for his folder. This is not good.
No, it's not.
No.
Section
But,
one,
no,
section 130.
like I said, I'm not.
No, but you made a point. You made a point. I get a chance to respond. Section 137, construction.
Is this about trade or?
A, no gender rating. Nothing in this act shall be construed as permitting health insurance insurers to discriminate in rates for health insurance coverage by gender. B, no limiting access to coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions. Nothing in this act shall be construed as permitting health insurance insurers to limit access to health coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, but Carl, I have access to a Maserati. It doesn't mean I can afford to buy one. I mean, access is one thing, but if you give insurers the ability to price these insurance policies beyond people's capacity to pay, and you don't supply enough resources to help them pay for it.
Where in the law is that?
That is the effect of the law.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It is not. You're talking about the 3-to-1 band.
I'm talking about the fact that the 3-to-1 ban you're talking about the elderly and community rating. I'm talking about community rating generally, that they have to charge the same rates essentially for everyone.
No, under the Affordable Care Act, they changed longstanding practice and said, we're going to have younger people who are healthier subsidize the coverage of older people. Right. Actuarially, people in roughly the age of 54, 55 to 65 have 4.8 times the amount of health expenditures as do people who are entering. Say basically
who are going to be that age someday.
Yeah, they're going to be that age someday. Right. And so what has traditional been before the Affordable Care Act, 42 states allowed a 5-to-1 band. So that you could charge the youngest person.
This came down to 3-to-1.
And this came down to 3-to-1. And what happened is it distorted it so that younger people, basically anybody below the age of 50, is paying a higher premium than they would otherwise pay in order to subsidize the people who are 54 to 65, despite the fact that that is the group that has, on average, higher incomes, greater wealth, and fewer childbearing and child-rearing expenses than everybody below them.
Yeah,
and
like
this
I said,
is why
I'm not gonna.
You brought up the subject, man.
I brought it up for a specific reason because I heard this. I heard you and Gruber going at this yesterday, and I'll just stipulate that if younger people agree not to grow old, that's a really bad deal. But my question is something else.
Let's just give free health care to everybody 55 and plus and give the bill to the people who are 20 and 25. Because after all, when they're starting out in life, they don't have to worry about starting a family or buying a home or any of that crap. Let's let everybody who's 54, 55 to 65, who has higher income, higher wealth, and no child caring or much less child caring and charitability, let's let them have a better deal, and let's make those little people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, let's make them pay more. Let's do that. That's fair, right? Absolutely. No, it's not.
That's how insurance works, Carl. But
no,
that's
not.
That's how insurance works. Carl.
That's not how insurance works.
This is. You guys can ask questions on healthcare. Yep. My question was about politics, which is, if you were on the other side of this fight, you could make some pretty powerful ads on this, couldn't you? And are you concerned about that?
Yeah, I am concerned about it, but I hope that they do the things that you were suggesting they do. Go out there and make this an attack on tax cut for the wealthy. Go out there and say that it takes away it takes away the protection for people with pre-existing conditions. Go ahead and go out there and say things like, we ought to tax younger people and middle-aged people more so that people who are 54, 55 will pay less. Go ahead and do that, because at the end of the day, I don't think those are winning arguments.
Well,
it's a winning argument to say today, oh, they're taking away your right for pre-existing conditions. Or rape, there's no longer saying rape is a pre-existing condition, or all the other this baloney that's being said right now. Fine, let's see what the final bill looks like when it comes out of the Senate, and then let's go
Do you
debate
think
it
the
for a year.
final bill in the Senate will be significantly different than the bill in the House?
Oh, I think, I don't know how, yeah.
Because you had a bunch of Republican senators yesterday saying what I've been saying. We're concerned about pre-existing conditions and other things.
Sure.
So they're as equally misinformed as
No, they
I
aren't.
am.
No, they want belts and suspenders.
If they
I'm talking to them. They want belts and suspenders because they want the argument to be over this so that in 3 or 4 months, people will say, well, wait a minute. They have taken care of it. I mean, I just read you the language in the bill.
Yeah, and I told you my answer. Saying that you have access to health care doesn't mean that you can afford it.
That's the language that's in the Affordable Care Act. Would you please read the Affordable Care Act?
I read the
It says
Affordable Care
access.
Act, Carl.
It doesn't
and
say. It doesn't say that you're guaranteed. That's why you have never hit in the Affordable Care Act these enormous numbers of people that we. At this very moment, there were supposed to be 20 million people in the exchanges, according to the geniuses who wrote that bill, like Gruber, and there are 10.2 million. Despite the fact that at this moment you're spending $49 billion this year for the subsidies, and we were supposed to be spending $75. Now, work the math. What that means is we are spending $4,800 per person who's being covered by the exchanges, when the geniuses who set this in motion said it would be costing us $3,700.
Listen.
This is a 30% in per capita cost above and beyond what we should be spending. And it's because we have too few younger people and too many to a larger percentage.
You're right.
Than
We should be doing
anticipated.
more to get younger people into the system. I
And
agree with
Gruber's
that. Because
answer
the
is-
only way this
Gruber's-
works
and
is if
Gruber's-
everybody is in
and
the
Gruber's
system.
answer-
And I
and-
agree with that.
Yeah, Gruber's answer
I
and
agree
Zeke
with that.
Emanuel's
But let
answer
me just
is
say-
tax them more than 3% of their adjusted gross income. Tax them higher. Tax the people who don't buy insurance more than 3% of their income.
I want to take these questions. I'll just leave this at this, and I'm going to make this point as the parent of a child with a pre-existing condition who lived in the system
And you're talking
before
to
the Affordable Care Act.
You're talking to a father of a child with a pre-existing condition.
So then you probably, maybe you did experience what I experienced, the horror of having to pay out-of-pocket expenses. When I'm making $38,000 a year, $1,000 a month to pay for my child's health care because the insurance I had wouldn't cover it, and she had a pre-existing condition, this 7-month-old baby, and I could not get other insurance. I don't want to live in a country like that.
Mine covered it. Mine covered it. I had a great policy.
Wow.
And for 30 days that I sat in the ICU watching my infant son, I was covered. And so I'm sorry you went through what you went through, and I'm sorry I went through what I went through.
Well, it went on for
But
quite a while
God
because
bless my
she has a
insurance
chronic,
company.
lifelong illness.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Rove, I'm so happy you're here. I'm a fellow college Republican. At
There we
St.
go.
David College. Yeah. So my question is about state-level politics and Illinois in particular. We have a crushing pension liability. We still don't have a budget. Governor Rauner has been working to negotiate a deal, but obviously in a system where there's massive gerrymandering and legislative control is pretty much out of his grasp for the foreseeable future, and where the other side can basically refuse to negotiate and then say that he's a do-nothing governor and beat him in 4 years. What options does he have from a messaging standpoint and from a gubernatorial standpoint to push them to negotiate a deal on these issues?
Well, he has no ability except to get reelected. It's the only thing that's going to cause him ultimately to come to the Speaker Madigan to come to the table. He controls the cards. He controls the legislature. I mean, it's astonishing. Your state takes in $1 billion less a month than it's spending, and you're not the federal government with the Federal Reserve and the ability to print money. And right now, you live in a wonderful town. It's a great state, and people are looking a way to take their business and their enterprise someplace else. And until the state gets its act together and finds a way to bridge this gap between a Democrat legislature and a Republican governor, and the way is not to raise taxes again and make another set of, keep doing it, and you're going to continue to hemorrhage jobs to the surrounding states, and with it, your future.
Thank you.
And somebody ought to get Rauner professional counseling on why he ran for governor in the first place. For God's sake. You may be the most ungovernable state in the country.
Mr. Rove, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ronan Shatsky, and I'm a first year in the college, and I'm wondering if you could help out us budding analysts and strategists in the room by telling us how you've learned from mistaken predictions that you've made.
Well, my job is to predict, so I have to keep predicting. I didn't think Trump would win the election. I think that's what you're alluding to. I thought.
And in 2012.
Well, 2012, I was right. We should not. We'll come back to that in a second. 2016, I thought he had a 30 or 40% chance of winning. A little bit higher than others, but I didn't think he'd win. I thought he'd win Florida. I was watching. I'm a numbers guy, so I was very carefully watching the absentee ballot returns in Florida, and the Republicans who lost the state by 70,000 are running about 200,000 ahead of what their absentee ballot and early vote numbers in 2012. North Carolina, again, we won the state narrowly, but we were running 100,000 ahead of where we were. In Ohio, it was like, they don't have party registration, so it's harder to do. But when Cuyahoga County is casting 40% fewer absentee ballots, something's going on. So I thought we'd win those three. I didn't see Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Michigan. And when the votes started coming in, and I'm looking at Kenosha, then Racine, I'm saying, my God, he's running way ahead of what he needs to do. But then Cuba settled it for me, and I don't mean Fidel Castro's Cuba, I mean Cuba, Wisconsin. It's a little town you've never heard of down on the southwest corner of the state. It's German, Catholic, Lutheran, New Deal Democrats, Mississippi River Valley. Cuba is the self-described city of presidents. You drive through the one street in this town, and on every street pole, there's a little marker of a president. And we tried really hard. This is, in order to win Wisconsin as a presidential Republican, you've got to do well in the western part of the state, the Mississippi River. And we went to Cuba. Bush, as president, goes in a little bus tour through this part of the state. So we drove down the little street in Cuba. And when Cuba came in, Trump was winning it big. And I said, shit, he's going to win Wisconsin. And if he takes Wisconsin, it's not going to be the only Great Lakes state. They sort of tend to operate together. And so he both did better among, Wisconsin, he gets fewer votes than Mitt Romney did, but he carried the state because there's a huge collapse of the African-American vote in the city of Milwaukee. Same in Michigan. He gets fewer votes than Mitt Romney got, but the Democrat vote doesn't turn out. And in Pennsylvania, he gets more votes than Romney did. But again, there are about 65,000 fewer voters in the city of Philadelphia, which went to 85% for Obama. So no, I didn't see that coming, and that's why we have elections, so we look at returns. 2012, here was my point. Do you know how many votes separated Mitt Romney and Barack Obama when Fox News called the state for Barack Obama?
About 1,000, right?
Yeah, 1,000. And see, I'm one of these people that thinks that we ought to wait until the people have been heard from. I remember how at 8 o'clock in the afternoon, or 8 o'clock in the evening Eastern time, in 2000, the networks called Florida on the basis of bad exit polling, for Al Gore. We had a guy in California who was our chairman out there, who was a first-time campaign chairman. He loved the work. He'd done a fantastic job. They had phone banks and everything. He called me frantic. He said, people are walking out of the polling places, having heard that Florida's been declared. He said, our phone banks are shutting down. What do I do? You take a line and draw it across the country. To the east of the line in 2000 are the states that had voted and closed voting by the time of the improper call of Florida by the networks. And west of that line are the states that still had their polls open. And you'll notice something. The states east of that line that had already cast their vote by the time they made the call, increase in voter turnout by and large in virtually every one of those states from 1996 to 2000. West of it, a decline. The network had an impact. And even while I was sitting there at Fox with 960 votes separating the two men in Ohio, I thought it was inappropriate for our network to call on the basis of the exit polling. Now, they're really smart people out there, and I'm hearing from the people in the Romney campaign, we still have these parts of the state out and these parts of these counties out. And I think it does a disservice to our democracy for the television networks to prematurely call these elections, let the votes be tallied, and then call the election. You know how many votes were separating George W. Bush from John Kerry at 2 o'clock in the morning when no network had called Ohio in 2004? 105,000. That's the double standard we have in the media. And I'm part of it, and I'm honored to be a part of the Fox network, but the media at writ large had better do a better job of calling these elections by letting the people be heard from and not trying to influence them by these exit polls.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rove, for coming here. The election of Macron and Trump is seen as the clash of symbolisms, open versus closed, liberalism versus nationalism. The force of symbolism has aroused people's gut feelings like never before. So my question is, to what extent is it true that we are in an age when the victory of election is based more on symbolism than on substantive issues, whether the symbolism be Trump's, appealing to fear like Swiss cheese or war, or appealing or representing hope like the centrist Macron?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we've got to be very careful about attributing a framework to the 2016 election. I think there's a populist element there. But I don't think at the end of the day that Donald Trump got elected because he had, like Le Pen, a well-organized, concrete, coherent plan of action that had been years in the making. I think he got elected largely for two reasons. One is people wanted change. About a third of the people, just under a third of the American voters, thought the country was going in the right direction, and they in the exit polls voted 91-8 for him, for her. But 2/3 of the people thought the country was off in the wrong direction, and they voted for him by a big enough margin to give him 46% of the vote and the three critical states that provided his electoral majority. So I think this was first and foremost an issue of, do you want to keep going in the same direction or do you want change? And right or wrong, fair or unfair, at the end of 8 years of dominance by the White House by one party, in the modern era, the American people, or at least a substantial number of them, say, let's go a different direction. The second part of it, though, was this populist moment. And rather than confronting it and letting the air out of it and diminishing it, Hillary Clinton had no message. I, to this day, can't figure out what her message is other than, you owe it to me. And I thought her comments last week were unhelpful
That's the lack of symbolism, right?
Well, symbols matter, but symbols are generally reflective of a vision. And people want to see a vision in whoever they have running for president. And Forward Together is not a sufficient vision for people. Say what you will about him. Particularly in the final 3 weeks of the campaign, he convinced people by restraining himself. And remember, he used to joke about it in the final 3 weeks. They've got me on a leash. I'm having to read my speech. They keep telling me, stay on message, stay on message. And he did. And the message
Those were the days.
Yeah, those were the days. Though, it was enough to cause people to say, you know what, he's risky, but he won't be more of the same. And part of the more of the same was just, he's not going to be what we've had.
That's true, though. In the Republican primaries, the trade issue, immigration issue, definitely animated his support.
Well, I think the anti-establishment thing animated it more than anything else, because if you look at it, with the exception of, in the exit polls, 2 states, Mississippi and Alabama,
on
there was
immigration,
there was a majority.
Yeah, that's true.
There was a majority of population that said, we want to find somebody.
I always
to
thought trade
resolve this.
was a more galvanic issue.
Well, I think
but you're
it was-
right, he was the anti-establishment
and
candidate against a bunch of establishment
Right,
candidates.
exactly. And I think trade was more important as a heuristic, fancy political science term, meaning something that allows us a shortcut to understand something bigger. And it's his stupid slogan, make America great again. People said, I want America to be respected, and I want America to be great, and I want America to be prosperous, and I want the America of my childhood to be the future that's possible for my kids. And right or wrong, he tapped into that. And she didn't tap in. I'm still trying to figure out what she was trying to tap into.
Mr. Rove, as with our current president, you strike me as the kind of guy who internalizes rather than externalizes vulnerability.
I have no idea what that means.
Fair point.
That's what you get for saying heuristic.
Nonetheless, which Democratic candidate do you find, or do you think that GOP voters, or the GOP more broadly, might find most intimidating in 2020? Who do you think will be most effective? And one more. Right now, we have a system of redistricting in which politicians can choose their constituents rather than having voters choose their elected officials. Now, you're not a supporter of redistricting reform. Why do you oppose having more people having the freedom to fairly seek public office?
First of all, I have no idea who the best Democrat's going to be in 2020. And I had, our earlier question about pundits. There are several geological ages which will come and go before the 2020 presidential elections on both sides. We'll have the Jurassic, the Mesozoic, the Tripazoic, and I mean, there are eternities. And I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody pop up who doesn't even today hold elective office. That is to say, somebody who gets elected governor of a major state and suddenly jumps onto the stage. So plenty of time to come, and I have no idea. Somebody who would be able to, in a sort of framework, somebody who would, most presidential elections are a reaction to what is. So somebody who comes in and says, I will be able to bring the country together, unite us, I will be deliberative, I'm not the typical Democrat, I can reach across party lines, and I can find a way to sort of give you a sense that I will be a sharp contrast to the current occupant without ever saying that. Just by being that, strikes me as somebody who could be dangerous. Redistricting reform. I haven't seen it work in any place except Iowa. I loved it. We had it in California. Oh, we're going to have it done by a commission. And when they finished the commission, there was a series of articles in the LA Times with every Democrat operative in the state crowing about how they had jerry-rigged the system to benefit them. The power of the microchip has given us the ability to draw, slice, and dice these lines, and they will continue to be sliced and diced. I think it works in Iowa because they're all polite people out there. But I think it also works because they require that you have the minimum number of times that you cut county lines, jurisdictions, and that you maximize communities of interest. So there's a West Iowa district, there's a Des Moines district, there's a Mississippi River district, there's a Quad Cities district, but I haven't seen it work anyplace else. And I got to tell you, I was in Texas. We'd get 46 or 47% of the vote in races for Congress, and out of 28 members, we had 2. Now we've got like 38, and we get like 55 or 56% of the vote, and we get like 70% of the members of Congress. That's just the way the world works. Eldridge Gerry, governor of Massachusetts, was the guy who started it all, a follower of the sainted Thomas Jefferson. And, I don't know a way to get around it. I don't like it. I like to have more competitive districts, but it strikes me that what we've got right now is, whether it's Arizona or California, these commissions, or Florida, they really are an attempt by either the trial lawyers or the Democrats or both to jerry-rig the system, and so far they've worked admirably.
Nobody tries to jerry-rig them on the other side?
Oh, each side does it.
So how much of it is sorting as well? I mean,
that's a bigger problem today, I think. And look, there's also that we're going through a moment in American history where our partisan loyalties are far more ingrained. I mean, think about the ticket splitters. I mean, when we entered the political business, you could, in a presidential election, look at 25 or 30 or 35% of the electorate as swing voters. And now we're down to a third of that at best. We're down to 10 points, 12 points, 8 points, or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Thanks for your answers.
Given all the disagreements within the Republican Party and the difficulty of getting a majority even among Republicans, what opportunity does that create for Trump to shift to be a president above parties? And just to carry that as a thought experiment, might that lead in some salutary direction of creating a new alignment and creating a center populist coalition that could do things like enact apprenticeship programs or follow through on the you've got nothing to lose by having high quality early child care, or even in the healthcare arena having a single payer scheme?
We get it. Go ahead.
Well, in this environment, none. No chance. Find me a Democrat who's willing to say something nice about Donald Trump, and I'll show you somebody.
Well, Gary Cohn.
Well, I'll show you somebody who's either serving on the White House staff or is eviscerated the next day by the Sanders-Warren wing of Tom Perez wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, Chuck Schumer is the quintessential deal maker. If this system had enough flexibility and enough pliability in it, he'd be cutting deals left and right with the president. But there's no pliability in the system. Democrats are fervent in their opposition. And look, he doesn't have the tools that a politician normally comes to the office with. Yeah, he's a schmoozer, and that's really good. And it's worked well on the international arena. I hear back from these meetings that people who are involved in those meetings are, frankly, pleased because he's solicitous and gracious, and he listens, and he talks, and they says the things they want to hear, and shows an openness to things they were afraid he wouldn't be open to. But that ain't the way that the Congress is going to deal with him. So it's going to require a different environment and a different person to make that happen. Now, maybe we'll see him do something on infrastructure, but the problem there is that he's hemmed in by his own party. I mean, Republicans spent 8 years lambasting the stimulus bill as a failed boondoggle, and are they going to turn around after doing that for 8 years and say, okay, well, the only problem with that was you spent $835 billion, now we want to spend $1 trillion. If he were able to channel it, if he had the right political instincts, I think he could channel that and find some places for common agreement, but I'm not certain yet that he's got the political skills or the people around him have those political skills.
Can I exercise the chair's prerogative and switch you guys around here? Because I don't know why it is that we...
You were looking like the Republicans at the White House on the signing of the American Health Care Act. Bunch of guys standing in line.
Exactly.
Well, this happened, I think, a while back with Governor Kasich as well. But,
yes.
Thank you for being here, first of all, Mr. Rove. I'm wondering about messaging within the Republican Party in particular, and I'm wondering about strategy. It seems as though with all of the rhetoric that is both populist and anti-establishment, the establishment base of the RNC is kind of losing some of its appeal. I'm wondering what you see the role of the RNC and of the platform of the Republican Party as being, and if you see that as changing as a result of the necessity for a fast answer, a quick solution.
Yeah. Well, let me come at it from a different direction. There is an anti-establishment mood in the Republican Party. You see it in the House in the Freedom Caucus. And they were the ones who kept Trump from getting the deal done. And then what happened is that they started hearing from other people. Most principally, I think, their colleagues, but also some from the people back home. I talked to one fellow who does not live in the state of the Freedom Caucus member, but is a personal friend of the Freedom Caucus member. And he told me the Freedom Caucus member called him and he said to him, look, before you say anything else, we've been friends for a long time and we're going to be friends for a long time more. Personal friends, but don't ever ask me for another campaign contribution after what you did to our party. Now, that caused the Freedom Caucus to step back and find somebody they could negotiate with and come up with, in my opinion, a meaningless amendment that gave them cover to vote for the bill, the MacArthur Amendment, which says states can can ask for a waiver from the Affordable Care Act and from the American Health Care Act provisions, the essential benefits, blah, 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 if they can prove that it's going to result in lower premiums or more people covered or better coverage, which I can't think of a single governor in America who's going to step forward and do that, but it gave them the ability to vote for the bill. I think that was an important learning experience for them. I'd say this, when it comes to making certain that the party has good candidates who are capable of working, realize it's a team sport and they're not going to get 100% and it can't be my way or the highway, and we actually have to try and reach across party lines, I say go look at 2014. Because in 2014, we had all these campaigns for the U.S. Senate, and the super PAC I'm a volunteer for, our donor said, look, we've been helping the person who got the Republican nomination, and we got Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, and we got Todd Aiken in Missouri, and you got to do better. And so we got involved in the primaries. And in every instance, the, quote, establishment candidate won, because we worked to develop their message, get their message out, and make Republicans aware this was exactly the kind of person that they wanted in office. And as a result, we got a great class. Happened again in 2016. And I think we're just going to have to do more of that. Once they get in, it's hard to knock somebody out, like a Freedom Caucus member out. Justin Amash and Tom Massey, I respect them. They're libertarians. They're not going to vote for anything. That's their principle. But some of these others can. Ted Poe of Texas, Freedom Caucus member, he said, what the hell am I doing? I came here to get things done, not to insist on purity. But in few instances, Holzkamp in Kansas, he got beat because finally the good people of the big first, 2/3 of the state of Kansas, said he's not paying attention to agriculture or us, he's being a hot dog, and voted him out. That happened largely on its own. We won't get involved in things like that. We'll be on the positive side and say, if there's an open seat, who do we help? Or if there's an incumbent who gets challenged by somebody who's of that ilk, what can we do to get them back in?
Thank you, sir.
Last question here.
Thank you, Mr. Rove, for coming. My name is Stephen. I'm a fourth year at the college, and my question is on North Korea. So right now, in 10 years or so, North Korea could develop an ICBM that could reach the west coast of the United States. Currently, right now, their short-range and medium-range missiles can reach South Korea and Japan, U.S. allies in the region. My question is, Donald Trump has a very, very difficult decision in dealing with North Korea, and your administrations have both kind of oversaw North Korea's development of nuclear weapons. So I just kind of wanted this, since we have two representatives of the previous administrations, I wanted to see your opinion on if there was ever a chance that your administration might have been able to take military action before it ever got to this point.
No, and neither could President Obama, because there are 10,000 plus pieces of artillery sighted in on buildings in Seoul.
30 miles from the DMZ.
And estimated casualties would number in, the low estimates are in the hundreds of thousands, and the medium range estimates are over 1 million. And it's not only artillery, but short range missile and medium range missile systems designed exactly to blow up lots of people in buildings. And we attack, and unless you take out the entire command structure of North Korea, that's what either President Obama would have faced or President Bush. And look, President Obama built on what we did. We built on what Clinton did. But I think Trump is right, or his Secretary of State is right. The time for strategic patience is over. But it ain't going to be an easy decision. The actor here that has to play a role is China. And the only way to get China to move at this point is, frankly, to ratchet up the pressure to a degree that we didn't need to or weren't willing to, and that is to basically begin. We've sanctioned North Korea. Now we have to start sanctioning Chinese firms that are doing business with businesses in North Korea. And that may sound easy, but that is something that's going to drive the Chinese nuts. But the only way to eventually change this is to have in my opinion, is to have the Chinese figure out a way to bring about regime change in North Korea, which means I thought it was very smart that we sent Tillerson, Pence, Mattis, Pompeo, all of them to Korea, and several of them explicitly said, we do not support and look forward to a day where there will be a unified Korean peninsula. We look forward to a denuclearized Korean peninsula with two nations, one north and one south, because that's the kind of thing.
Those are messages to China. Yeah.
So those are messages to China, not messages to North Korea.
It probably wasn't as constructive to suggest in the midst of this that we might withdraw from the Korea Free Trade Agreement or make them pay for the missile defense system. So, thank you.
Particularly since the Korean free trade deal was knocked down their obstacles to sale of American goods and services in Korea.
I have one last thing to ask you. As I've made thousands of ads in my life before I left the business and went into government and came back here. You've been involved in this for a long time. I've enjoyed it, but there are times when I think about the kind of thermonuclear quality of what we do, and I ask myself, how much did we contribute to this lack of faith that people are now exploiting? And I'm just wondering if you have those same thoughts.
Well, I have a slightly different view. I think we're in deja vu all over again. This is not the first time we found ourselves in a place where the trust in our institutions of government is low. In our lifetimes, we've seen it once or maybe twice, depending on how you look at Vietnam and Watergate. Are they one? Are they all part of one and the same? But it's happened in our lifetime, it's happened in our lifetime, but it's happened in the lifetime of our country a number of times. And we gloss over it now. But we've been in moments of a lack of trust and confidence in our government, and where our political system seemed broken. I wrote a book about the election of 1896, and I thought I knew McKinley, and I thought I knew the election, having studied it, as a lot of you may have done in a political science class, as one of the great realigning elections. But I wanted to study the election as people perceived it, as they received the election. And what I realized is the politics of the era and the election itself were a lot different than the academic exercise of impersonal forces of populism and urbanism that I'd read about. It was an election with brawling people. In fact, the whole Gilded Age of American politics makes politics today look like they're sitting around the campfire in Washington and singing Kumbaya. We have 2 years with a Democrat president, House and Senate. 2 years with a Republican president, House and Senate, and 20 years of divided government where they are not only, nothing gets done, because they not only have the two parties have a deeply conflicting view of what the future of the country ought to be, but they're still fighting the Civil War. In fact, when the Democrats take control of the House in 1874 for the first time in 18 years, it's called the victory of the Brigadiers. And the politics of the era is bitter beyond belief. I was reading the congressional record in a debate on tariffs and protection at the end of the debate, and one member gets up and begins excoriating a colleague, and the colleague gets up and says, "You're in violation of the rules," and the man turns to him, and in the congressional record it says, "I would not blank you if you were a dog." Now there are 4 ellipses, and I could sort of figure out what it is, but this happened on the floor of the House. 1888, the Republicans take control of the House, and the Democrats announce that when the House sits to meet, they will not allow a single bill to be brought up on the floor of the House. This isn't, we're going to shut down the government if you don't repeal Obamacare. This is, we don't care what you do, we're not going to answer the roll call, and we will deny the House a quorum. And the Speaker of the House lets this go on for a couple of months until they finally, after 2 months, they have a vote. And the vote is on one thing that they routinely did during the Gilded Age. If your party lost control of the House and you won narrow re-election, they would file an election challenge and kick you out. And so the Republicans are going to kick out a Kentucky Democrat who won his election by less than 50 votes, and they vote to kick him out. And there's no quorum. And at the end of the vote, the Speaker, Thomas Brackett Reed, says, "I direct the clerk to show Mr. Jones present, Mr. Smith present, Mr. Fall present, Mr. Winter present," calls out the name of every Democrat on the floor of the House. They immediately begin rushing, all hell breaks loose, and they immediately rush to the doors. But he's barricaded the doors, and only one person gets out. Constantine August of Texas, who kicks his way out, beats the crap out of a sergeant-at-arms, kicks his way out the door, and makes good his escape. But one Democrat stands up and screams at Reed, "Under God and the Constitution, you have no right to count me present on the floor of the House without my permission." He says the chair is merely stating a fact, as the honorable gentleman from Kentucky deny he's present on the floor. This kicks off a 3-month-long battle, ultimately settled by the U.S. Supreme Court, during which not a single bill gets passed by the House of Representatives for 3 months. Total of 5 months altogether, 2 months before, 3 months following. On the opening day of the debate, another Texan stands up, William Henry Howdy Martin, 6 foot 6 inches tall, mean as a snake, thin as a rail, fought the entire Civil War with Hood's Brigade. Got his nickname after the Battle of Chancellorsville when the revered Robert E. Lee reviewed the famed Hood's Brigade. And he stood up in his stirrups as Lee rode by, took off his hat and waved at him and yelled out, "Howdy!" Howdy Martin stands up on the floor, turns to the Democrats, points to Reed, says, "If any member will order me to remove this dictator from his position of power upon the podium, I will do so by force forthwith." Reed goes, "The honorable gentleman from Texas is out of order," and moved on. Howdy Martin is so pissed off, he shows up every day right in front of the podium, takes a seat in the front row, pulls out his 17-inch long Bowie knife, and spends the session methodically sharpening it on his boot heel in an attempt to menace the Speaker of the House. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember Nancy Pelosi doing that with her stilettos in 2011. I don't. But along comes in the election of 1896, a guy you know nothing about, William McKinley. His message is, we're all in this together. My vision of our country's future has a place for everybody, including the people that Republicans don't normally talk to, like Catholics and immigrants from Central Europe and Jews and working class people. And he ushers in a 36-year period of Republican dominance by changing the American political system to one that's more constructive and positive. And sometimes somebody's going to come along and do that. We screw it up until we get to that moment. Incidentally, if you love Chicago and you love Illinois politics, read the book, because the election comes down to the Gettysburg of the contest, Illinois. And William Jennings Bryan comes here and campaigns the final week of the campaign in places that you have been to. He spends 4 days in the city of Chicago campaigning from 7 o'clock in the morning till after midnight, covering every corner of the city in a desperate attempt to win the key state of the contest in Chicago politics. He's greeted at the station by 20,000 people screaming. A reporter says we could not hear ourselves think as we came into the station. The crowds were screaming so loudly. It's a hell of a story. It's got sex, violence, backstabbing, betrayal, and really cool nicknames. The Democratic frontrunner for president is Richard Park Bland of Missouri, who's led the fight for the free and unlimited coinage of silver, and he's defeated at the convention of the Democrats, which is held a few blocks from here, by William Jennings Bryan, who's not even a candidate 24 hours before he becomes the nominee of the Democratic Party. And Richard Park Bland's nickname is Silver Dick. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
So, so I guess we're not culpable. I feel better. I'll sleep better tonight now.
Look, I mean, we're all supposed to.
No.
Look,
I don't. But obviously, I mean, and I think it's an important lesson. Although I don't know why I wouldn't walk you like a dog is such a bad thing to say to somebody. But
it is anyway, on the floor of the House.
Anyway,
and he was a Democrat.
But
talking about another Democrat.
But I think that there is something different going on now. And it has a lot to do with the way we communicate and the tools that we have now.
Yeah, but that's not us. That's social media and a coarseness to our society, and it's been there before. It's just that we now have, it's cheaper and easier to tell a lot of people a bunch of crap. And I worry about it. If that's what you were getting at, I don't worry about the professionals. I really don't. They're sure they're going to make mistakes and they're going to go over the top, and somebody smart on the other side is going to take advantage of somebody who goes over the top. But I do worry about the fact that we are now getting most of our news not from somebody who is guided by some journalistic standard with an editor and somebody who's attempting to be fair and make certain the facts are right. But I mean, if I get one more stupid email from somebody, not to suck up to you, but I took the attitude was everybody who wrote me and said, Barack Obama was born in Kenya, I would write them back and tell them they were an idiot and tell them exactly why the Obama campaign was happy that they were discrediting conservatives by believing in that crap. And I don't know how to stop that flow except by having two parties in which people say, you know what, there's a limit. But it's not the limit of the political consultants and the ad makers by and large. It is a highly energized and enraged party on each side that is saying things about the candidate of the other party through their Facebook, their social media, their Instagram, their Twitter, whatever, that to the people that they know that has a corrosive influence on politics.
Fair commentary. Anyway, Karl Rove, thank you very much for being there.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow to move from healthcare to taxes. Grover Norquist, Austin
Wrapped around my
Goolsbee.
chair.
Thank you all so much for being here.